And if you do not consent to being recorded, you are asked to drop off the meeting at this time. Thank you so much. All right, Jamie. Okay, so everyone, welcome and thank you for attending this webinar as part of the National Indian Health Board's Climate and Health Learning Community webinar series. My name is Maddie Curry and I am the program coordinator with the National Indian Health Board's Climate Ready Tribes initiative, and I will be moderating today's webinar. And today we are so grateful to have Jamie Donatudo from the Swinomish Indian tribal community to present on their developed Indigenous Health Indicators. Unfortunately, tribal elder Larry Campbell is ill today, and so he was not able to make it. So we ask that you please send him your good medicine and well wishes. So a couple housekeeping items to cover before we dive into the presentation. Again, please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted online. If you do not wish to be recorded, please hop off the webinar now and you can watch the recording later. All participants have been muted. If you can please keep yourself on mute unless your presenter, unless Jamie specifically asks you to unmute and engage. And if you have any questions or comments, and please type those into the chat box here in the Zoom room. And then we can also take time to answer questions either at the end of the session or throughout the presentation. And then lastly, please take a few seconds at the end of the session to fill out an evaluation. I will be sending a SurveyMonkey link out to all of you registered attendants at the end of this webinar. So please take the time to fill that out and we would really appreciate your feedback. Quickly, the National Indian Health Board was established with the purpose to advocate on behalf of all federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes to ensure the fulfillment of trust responsibility to deliver health and public health services as assured through treaties and reaffirmed in legislation, executive orders, and Supreme Court cases. Our mission statement is that we are one voice affirming and empowering American Indian and Alaska Native peoples to protect and improve health and reduce their health disparities. All right, so let's meet our presenters. So unfortunately, again, Larry was ill today, but as a distinguished Swinomish tribal elder, Larry Campbell has been involved for more than 30 years in the Swinomish Indian tribal community's governmental committees, intergovernmental affairs, public relations, community development, spiritual traditions, and cultural activities. In addition to being a historical preservation officer, he also serves as the community health specialist in the Swinomish Community Health Program. Next is Dr. Jamie Donatudo. She is a community environmental health analyst for the Swinomish Indian tribal community located in the beautiful Salish Sea in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. For 18 years, Jamie has been enacting investigations on behalf of the tribe, including researching toxics in local and traditional foods, tribal health-related impacts from climate change, launching an environmental health education program, and developing community-based Indigenous health indicators. The Indigenous Health Indicators Project is a collaborative effort with longtime colleague and Swinomish elder Larry Campbell. Jamie and Larry most recently launched the Swinomish Community Environmental Health Program, and they work extensively with community education and outreach projects. Dr. Donatudo completed her doctoral studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, in the interdisciplinary graduate program of research management and environmental studies. And with that, Jamie, I'll let you take it away. If you want, I can play that video for you now if you'd like.
Yes, thank you, Maddie, please.
Sure thing. All right, please have patience with me as I switch screens.
So welcome everyone. We're gonna start off with a quick video to give you a bit more background about where the Swinomish tribe is and some of the climate and health risks that we face.
Okay, can you see that? Oh, can we see? Okay, thanks you guys. All right, here we go.
Maddie, there's no sound.
There's no sound. Uh-oh. Okay, let me see.
While Maddie's working on the video, I think this is a really great time just to quickly ask for everyone who's here, thank you for joining. And it would be great if you would just put your name and where you're from in the chat box. So good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're in. And it's also nice to see some faces that I know there. I see a couple of folks that are really familiar with this work, so it's good to see you. And for the new faces, hi Shasta. It's lovely to have you here. So there'll be a lot of time at the end for questions and answers, particularly because Larry is unable to join us today, unfortunately. So I'm hoping you all have some good conversation that you want to add. Hello, everyone. This is exciting. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. Maddie, what do you think? Should we try it again?
I think we should try it again. Let's see.
Okay, give it a go.
Fingers crossed. Love technology. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, oh, someone's helping me out. Okay. Hold on, select, join. Oh, okay.
The great picture of Larry in the center. Awesome.
Are you understanding my instructions, Maddie?
I'm trying. I'm sorry.
Let me see if I can talk you through it. When you click on share screen and then you choose which window you're going to share, there should be a little down arrow to the right that has the share sound option.
Yes.
And then you view audio options and you can choose, and then you can click on share in the bottom and it should include your audio.
Okay, that should work. All right.
Thanks, Shasta.
Shasta is always.
Yeah.
I give Google gets all of the credit.
Thanks everyone for your patience, and thank you, Shasta. I really appreciate that. Please, again, just thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's try again.
We've seen some things happening the last few years. Most notably, we've seen a couple of storm surge, tidal surges coming in here that got our attention.
Well, I guess one of the most famous things that you hear in this part of the world, when the tide's out, the table is set. So anytime that we had a large drop in the tide, a minus tide, all we had to do was just go down to the beach and dig some clams. Whoever went and got the clams would go out and just tell the community, hey, we're having a clam dig down the beach, so come on down, come down and help yourselves. I think for any culture to be able to survive and thrive, that it has to adapt. But at the same time, there's these ancient principles and traditions that we try to live by.
Shellfish is a poster child for this, I think. That's a historic resource that they've relied on for forever. that may not be there in the future. Another big reason is, the tribe has low-lying lands on the north end of the reservation where they're investing millions of dollars in development activities. They started with a bingo hall and expanded that to a casino. Now we're expanding it to a hotel. So that was another huge driving factor that was motivating us to begin thinking about this. We absolutely are, starting to thread issues of sea level rise into a lot of our planning and thinking and development projects.
We've been in the forefront in collecting data and looking at all that and doing models to determine what the impacts will be to us, because we live on an island. We have a lot of low-lying property, and so from that standpoint we have to be very careful going forward.
People have been looking at what we've been doing and saying, oh, you guys are so ahead of everybody else, but we're not. Everybody's playing catch up here. Let's be clear about that. We're behind the curve. We're way behind the curve.
The first effects of nature are going to be seen, and they're going to be recorded to the tribal people, because since we're closer to nature and we're closer to that environment, and we're going to show the effects of it long before that you have people who work out of the 50th story in a skyscraper in Seattle.
Thank you, Maddie, for working through the technical difficulties and showing that video. I'd like to say that video is almost 10 years old now, so it's not a new video. The Brian Clattersby is our former chairman. Our current chairman is Steve Edwards. I'm glad that you all got to see Larry, at least in the video. He does send his regards, and he apologizes he can't make it today. Please send him well wishes and prayers for his health. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the time and energy. As we all know, we probably all are feeling a little bit of Zoom fatigue. So what I'd like to do today is give you a little bit more background on some of the work we're doing specific to health at Swinomish and in the context of climate change. Next slide, please. So as the film mentioned, Swinomish is a low-lying reservation off the coast of Washington State on Fidalgo Island. And as you can see from this particular map, we're about 90 miles north of Seattle as the crow flies. The reservation is 90% ringed by water. And we have the mighty Skagit River just south of the reservation, feeding out into the Skagit Bay, and there are all the species of anadromous salmon are still in this river. So it's a pretty important river, and as you can tell just from where we're located, species like shellfish, as was mentioned in the movie, and salmon are incredibly important to the tribe. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting picture. This is facing west on the reservation. You're seeing a road that is completely covered by water in a residential area on the reservation. In the background, you can see the water breaking up over the breakwater area that was separating the land from the bay. And what's interesting is if you'll notice, it's not actually raining. This is a winter storm during a king tide. So we have really low pressure, high tides, but not an actual storm happening. And so we're seeing this more and more on the reservation where low-lying areas are getting flooded, houses are getting flooded, infrastructure is getting flooded. So what does this mean? What are some of the health impacts? Well, we could do it from a physiological point of view and think about for instance, mold in homes, buckling infrastructure, so inability to get to hospitals. All of these things are incredibly important. But when we think about health in that way, we're missing a much larger context of health. Next slide, please. So often in most climate change impact assessments, health is a desktop exercise. So you essentially take a framework, you figure out what the climate impacts will be, and then you determine what the physical probabilities are of health impacts. So, you know, increased heat-related illnesses, increased illnesses from vector-borne diseases, et cetera. And it's all done basically by computer modeling. We wanted to change that because we wanted to hear directly from community members about what the most important aspects of health are to them and how they'll be impacted by climate change. Next slide, please. So almost 20 years ago now, I know you said 18, Maddie, you were really close. I've been with the tribe for 21 years now. Larry and I started working on this set of Indigenous health indicators. And what we really wanted was a set of indicators that we would be able to use in all kinds of assessments, climate change, also toxic assessments, development assessments, where we could talk about other aspects of health that were really important to Swinomish and be able to both reflect what was important to community members, but also be able to explain it in a way that made sense to folks outside of the tribe. And so what you see on the screen are the Swinomish Indigenous Health Indicators. So these are specific to Swinomish. They were developed in coordination with some other tribes in the Coast Salish region. So these may potentially be reflective. There are aspects in there that are reflective of other Indigenous communities as well. But we developed them so that they would be able to be tailored to other communities. And we can talk about that later if folks are interested. But these are specific to Swinomish. And what you'll see here are non-physical aspects of health. So for example, with education, we're not even talking about graduation rates. We're actually talking about Swinomish teachings and whether or not the elders are able to pass on those teachings to the youth. These are important aspects of Indigenous health. Self-determination and sovereignty, you can see those are in there. They're quite important. You don't often see those in any sort of health assessment, but as we all know, working for or being Indigenous, this is an incredibly important aspect of health. As you'll also see, this is on a familial and community-wide scale. So these are not individual aspects of health, but really thinking about how everything is connected, and not just humans and human community, but also all of the other relatives as well. The seafoods, the plants, the water, the land, the air, all of it. Next slide, please. So how do you actually operationalize something like that? And I should say, if people have questions about how we develop those, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A, and I'm happy to go over those. It's a whole nother process. But you'll see them in orange on the bottom. We took the 6 Indigenous health indicators, and through our impact assessment, which the tribe did in 2009, we identified sea level rise and storm surge as 2 very important aspects of how climate change was going to impact the reservation. So you'll see in purple and blue some of the things that we looked at in terms of how sea level rise and storm surge would be impacting the change in the habitat structure and function of 3 important first foods for the tribe: salmon, crabs, and clams. Of course, we're a coastal tribe, so depending on where you are, the 3 foods that you choose, 3 to 5 foods, would be very different, and they don't necessarily have to be first foods. We could have chosen cedar, we could have chosen salal, we could have chosen camas, plants. There are other important first foods and medicines that could be in here, but most importantly, what they are is reflective of some of the many cultural keystone species that are important to the tribe. And we wanted to know how climate change, sea level rise and storm surge, would impact these as our proxy measures to thinking about impacts to the 6 Indigenous health indicators. So for instance, we've worked with a tribe in North Carolina, and they wanted to look at the 3 sisters. They wanted to look at corn and beans and squash. And so you can put whatever your first foods are in there to then think about how to assess your own Indigenous health indicators. Next slide, please. So what we did was we really wanted to hear from community members. We did not want this to be a desktop exercise. So we worked with the Swinomish fisheries folks and used modeling to determine what it would look like in 2100 for the habitat for Sam's crab and salmon. And then we created these images looking at different places on the reservation. We chose 6 different sites on the reservation that were important habitats for these particular species and also important to community members, particularly places that were important to community members. And we used a simple scaling technique. So if it looked like the projections were going to severely impact salmon, crabs, or clams, we rank them with an H, high risk. And as you can see, it goes from high, medium, low, and low. And I'll say of the 6 places that we looked, we only had 1 medium low, and the rest of them were between medium and high. But we took these images and we brought them out into the community, and we really met people where they were at. So as you'll see in the next couple of slides, we took these sets of images and we hung them up in the senior center. We published them in the monthly newsletter, we put them online, and we just invited people to check them out and just start thinking about what they felt when they saw them and what it meant to them. And then we also, again, met people where they were at in terms of doing workshops and talking about what the impacts to Indigenous health would be. Next slide, please. So for instance, when I knew that there was a clam opening, I would go down to the shore and bring a barbecue with me and say, hey, when you guys are done digging clams, I'd love for you to take a look at these and tell me how you think that this would impact your health and well-being. And knowing that all aspects of Indigenous health are important and all of the sites that we're looking at are important, which ones should we focus on first, knowing that the tribe has limited time and resources? So we weren't at all saying that some of them were more important than others. We were just saying, hey, which ones should we really focus on first, knowing that we're going to really work hard on focusing on all of them as we move along. And so this is one example of how we went out and elicited responses from community members. Next slide, please. And another one was, I went to elders lunch and sat down with the elders and had lunch with them. Because as most of you probably know, food is an incredibly important part of any community gathering, and sharing food and then having the discussions would be the way to go. So that's exactly what we did. We shared a meal, and then I would show the posters that you saw earlier or do a PowerPoint presentation and ask people to think about, again, which aspects of health should we focus on first? Which areas on the reservation should we focus on first? Knowing what you now know. And I'll say that we use a simple ranking system. It's like a Likert scale. So, you know, the Dow Jones is a Likert scale, APGAR, Baby is a Likert scale. You can use numbers, you know, 1 to 5. You could use good to bad. You can use colors. You can do it in any way. But what's so lovely about using a Likert scale is that when you show these pictures, so many stories come up. People are so connected to these areas since time immemorial. But those aren't necessarily stories that need to leave that room or the community. So by using the Likert scale, people are able to reflect how important or which ones they want you to focus on first, how important these areas are to them without actually having to share the stories as well, which can be a really important way to be able to communicate information to folks outside of the community without having to share proprietary information. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just give you a brief overview of what our results look like. And so we in all spoke to 68 adults within the Swinomish community. It's about 14% of the population that lives on or near the reservation. And what we found really interesting, and this surprised me, was that education across the board with all the different groups that we spoke to was ranked #1. And what we did was we went and talked to different groups where they were at. And so the demographics were similar. So for instance, at elders lunch, it was primarily elders. When I went out to talk to clam diggers, you're talking about a different demographic, right? Younger folks, probably between 20s and 40s. We went to the high school and held a class in the high school and asked them to do this exercise as well. And what you see with the ranking is actually the amount that people agreed. So across all these different groups that we spoke to, almost everyone agreed that education was ranked first. And natural resources security, which was the one that I thought would be ranked first, came in a close second, followed by cultural use and resources. I will say, just because resilience and self-determination are ranked 5th and 6th does not mean that they're not important. It's just that education was the thing that everyone said we needed to focus on first. and natural resources security second. Next slide, please. So what do you do with that information? And this is a really brief overview of the entire process. This has been happening for a couple of years now. So in 2017, we started to develop a curriculum. So this is an informal curriculum, which means that it's taught outside of the schools, and it's open to community members of all ages. So, you know, if you come with littles, we make sure that there are activities and providers there to take care of those littles so that everyone can have involvement in the curriculum with these hands-on activities. And it's based on the 13-moon seasonal harvest cycle of many Coast Salish communities, Swinomish included. And as an example, we would, each moon has a minimum of 2 activities, one plant focused and one animal focused. And the idea is really to get people to reconnect with areas that are super important to them, but also be able to bring elders and youth out together so elders are be able to share the stories and the youth are able to learn what their ancestors have been doing since time immemorial on this land. Next slide, please. So here's one example. These pictures were taken in June. We have some really low tides in June, which is nice. So you can get out on the beach and really see the tidelands when the water is off of them. So they're dewatered. We did a clam event. So we took youth and folks of all ages out onto the beach, talked about clam digging, dug clams with them, had the youth actually pick clam shells and decorate any way that they wanted to, and then gift them to an elder in their community and ask for a story in exchange. And so this is just one of the many ways that we are trying to support and bolster education within the community. Next slide, please. I also mentioned natural resources security being highly ranked for our particular Indigenous Health Impact Assessment. And so what we're looking at right now, and we're just starting to build, is the first modern day clam garden in the United States. So clam gardens are an ancient indigenous technology. They've been dated back to about 3,500 to 4,000 years old up in BC. There are a few clam gardens in the British Columbia, Canada area that are currently in use, have been revived and are in use. And this is a picture of one of them actually. And what it is a really low lying rock wall that you build below mean low tide. So this is, I mean, you have a really strong tide to even see this wall. And what it does is it creates a bit more of a terrace. Can you go to the next slide, please? I think it might show it better. Yeah, so this is a side view. So the top is just a beach without a clam garden, and the bottom one is a beach with a clam garden. So you'll see the rocks piled up on the lower left-hand side, and it just creates more of a terrace. So it increases the clam habitat area, so that the amount of sediment that clams and other bivalves like to be in. And it is a garden, you tend to it. We go and we ensure that there's not seaweed on the ground, feed the seaweed to the upland plants. And it's not just about clams. There are so many different species that habitate and produce around these areas. So from BC, there are papers coming out showing that there's increased productivity of the species as well as increased biodiversity. You see more kelp around the clam beds. You have increased areas for outgoing juvenile salmon to hide. In terms of climate change, what we really love about this is that we're really looking at food security in times of change. So as sea levels rise, you could move these rock walls, and there's actually a lot of data showing that in BC, those walls have been moving over the past couple of thousand years. Also, there's a lot of shell hash. There's a lot of clam shells there, which are very basic in nature, which may help with ocean acidification. And again, when you have something like this, which is essentially a bit of a natural breaker, it helps attenuate when you've got big storm surge as well. So this is an indigenous technology that's been around for a really long time that is being used to think about climate adaptation in the future. And I remember talking to our former chairman, and he just said to me, you know, we've been here since time immemorial. We have seen change. We know how to deal with change. This is the way that we're looking at climate, and this is the way we're going to move forward. We're going to figure out how to adapt because this is what we're really good at doing. Next slide, please. So that is a super, super quick overview. I would love to have a conversation with you all. Tagui, it's thank you in Lushit seed, which is the Swinomish language. What you see here is actually a picture of beach seining. So family groups work together and they actually hold a net and walk out into the water every other year when the pink salmon is running. And they pull the nets back in together, all working together, and you're seeing them throw the salmon into the tote. But what's not in this picture is not just the folks that are working the net, but the kids that are running around in the background and the youth that are sitting and helping maybe mend nets or watching the other kids, and the elders who are telling stories. And it's an excellent example of all 6 aspects of the Indigenous Health Indicators: self-determination and sovereignty, food security, community connection, education, cultural use and resources, and resilience. So it's activities like this that are really important to think about for the next 7 generations. And I would like to thank the National Indian Health Board for hosting today and also providing funding for some of this work, as well as EPA and the National Science Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And at this point, that was a super quick overview, but I would love to hear from you if we can open it up and just start to have a conversation, because I'll say that Larry and I have worked with Indigenous communities both in Canada and the US, all over, thinking about how can you modify or find your own Indigenous health indicators to then use it in your own work. And so we have done that with communities before, and it is possible. And there's actually a few people on this webinar today that have helped me develop an online learning module, which should be out within a month, that anyone can use to figure out how to do this work in their own communities. So if folks are interested, please put your email in the chat box and I will do my very best to write it down and send you a link when the module comes out. So Tagui, thank you. And I would love to open it up for questions. Which I guess means that people could either put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Is that okay, Maddie? Okay, awesome.
Yeah, you should have the option to unmute yourself. But if not, you can ask to unmute.
And Maddie, is it possible to collect the email addresses that go in the chat too? Okay, awesome. I'm not that fast of a writer, but I appreciate that people are interested, so thank you. Please feel free to unmute yourself and chat it up. And be careful, I know a few people on here, I might call you out. Like one of the things that we only touch on in here is emotional health, mental health. And Shasta Gone, who's on the webinar and who helped with the technical issues earlier, she works with PALA, and they have an amazing way to talk about the social emotional piece as well.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I'm just always delighted to be able to see what you are working on in Swinomish, and you know, I've seen your work presented before, but it always is wonderful to see it again. And you know, from the mental health perspective, we've learned a lot here in Paula from what's been going on over the last almost 2 years with COVID, and being able to apply some of what we're hoping to use or preparing to use to help people deal with the mental impacts of climate change, and seeing that there's overlap with how people are adjusting to and managing the emotional trauma that's happening from COVID and so much loss in their communities. So I think if I could make that a question, I wonder how you see how that has happened in Swinomish. Are you seeing overlaps between what you're preparing for with climate adaptation and what you think might apply to COVID and future public health pandemics, I guess?
That's a great question and not an easy one to answer, is it? I think one, we have certainly felt the effects of COVID at Swinomish and mourned losses of people that we really care about. I think that the tribe has done an incredible job of keeping people safe, and in large part has helped in that way protect a lot of folks. And so, you know, first and foremost, I think that Swinomish has been amazing at being proactive thinking about climate change, proactive thinking about COVID, and also super protective of community members and staff like myself. But yes, the mental health issue takes a huge hit. And it's interesting, I've seen a lot of overlap actually in the way that we're thinking about climate and the way that we're addressing COVID. For example, you know, we have certain species that particularly elders really long for. You know, their soul really feels like they need to be fed. Their spirit needs to be fed with particular first foods that maybe they don't have access to anymore due to climate change, due to restricted access and many other things. And so, and also with COVID, you know, people can't go out as much. And so even creating some of these foods and medicines and then distributing them in community has been a really great way to share. I am not a Facebooker, but we developed an online Facebook group called 13 Moons at Work, if anyone is a Facebooker, and put all of the first foods and medicines and a lot of the 13 Moons activities that we do on there and share that out. And I remember one of our educators put on a video about, I think it was horsetail. It was in the beginning of the pandemic, and we had something like 4,000 views in one day. It blew my mind. And so I think being innovative in the way to be able to reach people and be able to gather, whatever that means, in whatever way possible, being outside a lot. Like we did a small blessing ceremony where the Clam Garden site is being built just earlier this month. Had to be small due to COVID, but was so very powerful to be able to share that work and to hear the stories. So, I mean, my answer is essentially figuring out, I mean, Larry always tells me if there's a way to do it, we're going to figure out how to do it. And so I think being able to figure out how to gather and outside and have access to all of these really important cultural foods and medicines.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
And long-winded, sorry about that. You're welcome. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? I'd love to hear comments. Things that you think could work, couldn't work. Don't be shy. We can also just all leave early and have 20 minutes without screen time. I don't know. How's everyone feeling? Okay, I don't think there are any questions in the chat unless I
Hey, Jamie?
Yes.
This is Dorette, Quintana English from the California Department of Public Health and the CalBrace project. And I just want to thank you for your presentation and all the work you've been doing, and the tribe for its work on this also. I wondered if you had any thoughts like how public health departments or other state agencies can support the work that tribes are doing on adaptation and climate and health at this time.
I think that I heard your question, Dorette, so I'm just gonna say it again and hopefully I heard it right. You were just asking about my opinions on what public health departments could do. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
to
great.
be good partners, and you know, if we have any particular resources that would be helpful. I feel like we need capacity building to be better partners with tribes also.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sorry, my internet cut out for a second, so thank you for repeating the question. I think that health departments can be great partners, to be honest, and also acknowledging that you're underfunded and understaffed. But in particular, I know in California, there's a lot of groundbreaking work going on in thinking about, you know, not just saying we need to do X with tribes, but actually going to the tribes and saying, what do you need? How can we support you? Which is so lovely to hear. And being able to say, we have resources, whether that's folks that can help with modeling or folks, financial resources to help the tribe really figure out how they want to address climate change, and not coming in with preconceived notions of what the health priorities are. And I think that health departments are really optimally set up to be able to do that, create a relationship based on what the tribe's needs and wants are, and ensuring that there's data protection there so that whatever is developed, is owned by and for the tribe. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I saw one come through the chat. How often do we conduct assessments? That's a great question. For this particular project at Swinomish, we've done it once. We would like to do it again, and that is the hope, to have it perhaps every 10 years. I'll be honest, it takes a lot of work. I mean, if you want to do this right, and if you want to hear from the community, it takes time. Even someone like myself who's been there for a long time, there still needs to be the trust. But also, sometimes I just go to someone's house and I sit on their couch for a couple of hours before I even start asking questions. And so it's not like you send out a paper assessment and get a quick answer. There has to be meaningful relationships there. And so for me, I would love to do it every 5 years, but it's probably going to look like 10. Was there another question in there that I might have missed?
Yeah, there's one more. If you want, I can read it out, or.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure thing. So from Colleen Sanders, one of the health impacts we're seeing in our area is from wildfire smoke. And Western public health recommendations are to shelter in place and stay inside. But for tribal communities, we know that first foods wait for no one. There isn't an option to stay home, and so tribal members are more likely than non-tribal people to be exposed to chronic smoke impacts. Did your research identify any disconnect with non-tribal health recommendations in this kind of way?
That's really powerful. Yes, of course. I mean, I think one of the most obvious ones for us is that the Salish Sea is not a pristine location. There's a lot of pollution and there's a lot of advisories. And, there's research showing that warming oceans are increasing some of the bioavailability of some of these toxic chemicals in the seafoods that are so incredibly important. And then advisories from, for instance, health department for non-tribal members saying, you should only eat 1 or 2 meals a month. I mean, this is not a new story. I think a lot of folks have heard something like this before about fish consumption advisories. But there's no way that people are going to stop eating salmon or crabs or clams. And so I think that that's one of the best examples I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, there are certainly a lot of them. And again, I think it's just trying to figure out how to work creatively. Maybe it's not the elders that go and do the harvesting when it's really smoky. Maybe you get a couple of younger folks with some really good N95s to take turns and not be out there all day anymore. I mean, having Huckleberry overnight camp is ideal, but if we can't do it, we'll do at least a couple of hours out there if it's super smoky. Yeah, and unfortunately, COVID doesn't help either. But I hope that answers your question.
Let's see, from Jean Weaver, thank you, Jeannie. From Jean Weaver asks, have you had any studies or reports on how climate change is impacting your plant-based medicines and the availability of them?
That's another great question. So we personally haven't done any studies yet. We've been talking about camas is a really important traditional plant here. It's, for folks who don't know what camas is, it's a bulb. It's a starchy bulb that has a lot of inulin in it. And it was probably one of the main starches that was used before potatoes ever showed their face around here. And you dig it once a year when it's blooming so that you know that the flower is purple and therefore edible and not white, which is not edible and is called death camas. But camas has been overgrown has been grown over by invasive species for a long time. So the tribe has really been focused on trying to bring camas back, but now thinking about what that looks like with changing seasons and seeing availability change and it starting to bloom at different times of the year. There's a lot of just, at this point, us thinking about what we've heard from the past from elders and what we're seeing now. I do know that there are a couple of other groups that are thinking about changes to plant medicines, particularly cedar, which is so important in this area, and how climate change is impacting cedar and increasing cedar death, and ideas of what to do about it. But the Swinomish hasn't personally done any projects yet. But if people are interested, please let me know. And if you know of any studies, please feel free to send them my way. I'd love to see them. Anyone else?
Just a lot of thank yous for your knowledge and for your time and experience. No other questions coming through the chat as of right now.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate everyone's time here today. And if you're all dropping off, please unmute yourself and at least say goodbye. We can hear your voices.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Be
you.
safe out there.
Thank you.
Everyone's time.
Good day, week.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending this Climate and Health Learning Community webinar. You will please be on the lookout for our next webinar of this series, and also keep an eye out for an email from me for an evaluation survey. We would love to have your feedback. And again, on behalf of NIHB, thank you, Jamie, Dr. Donatuto, for sharing your time. And please, again, send good and healthy medicine to Larry.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Denise. Oh my gosh, Denise. I didn't know. Hi, I didn't know you were on here. You're like one of the original people that helped test these.
I know. It was so good to see you.